Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome to the final video in our Christopher Nolan month. This has been a series that we've been rolling around since the beginning of August. I believe our first video was the 1st of August. We did a little introduction video before that point, but officially the beginning of August. So we've technically gone over a month. We said that we would, and we had like a little almost epilogue, Christopher Nolan month epilogue, with 3 extra videos that we decided to throw in there. We had our Battle of the Brackets, where we argued for best Christopher Nolan moment. We had our Tenet spoiler review, which was really, really fun to do. Clocking in at over 2 hours, but we knew it was going to be long. And then this is our final video today, where we're going to be ranking all of Christopher Nolan's feature films. From worst to best. So there's 11 films, 11 picks, and it's going to go. I'll give my 11th pick, so bottom of the pile pick, over to George, etc., until we get to our number 1 favorite Christopher Nolan film. And it's kind of with a heavy heart with this video, because it's this is a month that I know that we've both really, really enjoyed doing. It's been a blast to go back through all the movies, but just sort of like this celebration of Christopher Nolan himself, even down to the logo, which is probably going to switch back to the old one now. It feels weird, and I don't like it. It's almost like the end of Doctor Who. Like, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want it to end.
I know, same here. We must have a conversation about the logo, actually. I kind of actually want to... We'll discuss that off air. But,
okay.
Some ideas are worrying, but it's been strange because we've been fans of his for years. We've known each other for years. And when Dunkirk came out, it was like... Maybe because it was mid-July and review out and done. There was no hype, no build-up. We'd already done Star Wars on this, but we hadn't had that. We need to do everything. And I think when we started doing our retrospectives, we did one on Tarantino last year, Spielberg the year before. I mean, it was kind of said, okay, we'll do one for Nolan. And we always said that. And then it got to this year and it was like, are we going to do individual videos, or are we going to do a retrospective, or are we going to do 2 retrospectives? And it ended up being another entire month. And off the bat, this has been my favorite month of content we've done on the channel. And we've done 2 Star Wars months, which is my favorite franchise. And we've done so many great things over the years, but maybe it's the fact that cinemas were closed. We've been not stripped for content, but maybe it's because it was the celebration of not just his work, but we would be going back to the cinemas soon and all that kind of stuff. There are so many sort of contributing factors, I think, to these moments, to getting to the cinema when me and you watched it for that first time. There's just something really fitting about this. And I've enjoyed everything, even Battle of the Brackets, doing the quiz, which was harder than all the other quizzes, and a ranking video. And we were able to conjure up everything into this. I even did the little gesture there, which is a beautiful mini segue. We're not going to be doing any Tenet spoilers in this discussion today. There is a spoiler review, which we've put in the link below. So if you haven't seen our spoiler video, check that out. We also have a theory on something from the film, which is on our channel too, which is kind of shortly blown up, which none of us saw coming. So if you want to know some deeper things about Tenet, please check them out. We're going to obviously include it in our list, but we're not going to be delving into specifics. The likelihood is that spoilers may crop up for some of the other 10 films. I doubt it, but just on the off chance, there will be no Tenet spoilers at all today. And I'm going to quickly bring up the socials as well. As usual, best way to follow us for content. It's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and there's a link in the description for the TeePublic below. So we've not done a ranking video for a long time, me and you. So you kind of mentioned we'll do 11, 11, 10, 10, 9, 9, etc., etc. Before we get into it, I'm going to quickly mention we haven't had a discussion about how we ranked them. This is each to our own. I don't know Chris's 11. Sorry, Chris's 11. He doesn't know my 11. We know gists of each other's. We kind of think where placements maybe. Tate spoke to us about some of his, where his would be. But we don't know each other's list, which is a really nice thing. But me, as a personal thing, just to quickly say, I've ranked these in a weird way. Normally, when I talk Star Wars, I split them in 2. I say, what do I enjoy? What are my favorite Star Wars films? What are the best Star Wars films? There is a massive difference between what is the best and what is your favorite. Conversation for another discussion one day. I've tried to rank mine for a factor of a couple of things. I've gone for what do I enjoy in terms of favoritism, what do I think is the best crafted, and I'm adding the Christopher Nolan element as well to that kind of the Nolan film, I guess we could say. So not that it's been a be all end all. I haven't sat there with three columns ticking things. I've sat down, I've had a thought, I've written some notes, not as many notes as the Tenet review. And I have in my hands the lists. So I've got my 11. I don't know if you've done something similar.
Yeah, so I'm kind of consolidating everything that you just said sort of into my picks as well. There are some that outright have a definitive position in the list, which you'll see shortly, where my emotions sort of get the better of me. And it has to be in a certain spot, whether that's best or worst. Not to give anything away, you guys probably already know what my number 11 is going to be. But I am also including factors of, like, just as a film, you mentioned the craft of the film, so I have brought all those elements in. I will go on record saying this is one of the hardest rankings I've ever had to do, and honestly, looking at my list now, anything could be interchangeable any day of the week. We have obviously had Tenet out, which hasn't had the longevity, it hasn't had the staying power as a lot of all these other films, so I have taken that into account as well. So take this ranking for what it's worth. Honestly, this could change, but I think with all that being said, shall we get into our rankings? And rather anticlimactically, my number 11 pick, so my least favorite Christopher Nolan film, is The Dark Knight Rises. It's just, as a Batman fan, even as a continuation of this franchise, I found it a very lackluster ending to the trilogy. And I know I'm not the only one that thinks that. I know that it definitely has its fans, and its fans are very vocal, but I have, thankfully, over the years, found almost like a community for people that don't like it and do see its shortcomings. And it's I just think in the writing, I thought it felt very cobbled together. It almost felt like Christopher Nolan's heart wasn't entirely in it as maybe as it was for Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. And just in terms of its plot, its characters, everything like that. There's a 2-hour plus review on me arguing my case as to why I don't like it. There's a 2-hour video, obviously, with you on the review arguing why you do like it. It's a very divisive film, but for me, it is that bottom of the pile because it's the only Christopher Nolan film where I left the cinema actually physically angry for a long time. So Dark Knight Rises is my number 11 pick.
So my number 11 actually might be a bit of a shock. I think it's worth saying, I believe you like 10 of his 11 films. Yes, I like 11 of them, which makes it even harder, as you said, to rank these, because you kind of said before we actually did this that, you know, you put something you like and you look at the list, it's like sort of like 8th and 9th. You're like, whoa, that's the quality of this director. So my 11th pick is actually Insomnia, which was interesting because it was a first viewing recently. I enjoyed it. It didn't have the initial, it didn't grab me by the throat, but the more I thought about it as time went by, I started to enjoy it more and more. If you saw back the brackets, then you can see that I actually did a really good defense piece, and there's some great things in it. There's good performances, but the reason why it's not 10th, because it's obvious what's coming next, is, I don't know if this is unfair, not because it's a remake, it's not an adaptation, but it's below a film because something's more original, which I'll talk about on the next one, which is really, really easy to guess what that is. So Insomnia's last. It's, again, I enjoyed it. It doesn't have the lasting impact of his other films.
Oh, there might be a placement on mine then that might tick you off in a minute. But my number 10 pick is Following. Not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. For what it is, it was his first feature. As such, it is very raw, from the camera work to the lighting to the limitations that he faced at the time. Recorded over a year or a year and a bit, I think, just in between their day jobs. It really is kind of like a labor of love, and you do see some of the seeds of what would eventually become when he does get these bigger projects and bigger budgets and everything like that. It's a perfectly serviceable film for what it is, but the reason that I have ranked it that low is that it doesn't anger me as much as Dark Knight Rises did, for example. That's why Dark Knight Rises took my 11th spot. But I had to put this at 10 just because purely it is less polished, and I'm not going to hold that against the film because it was where he was starting out. There are certain plot threads towards the end which seem a bit easy, but I appreciate it for what it is. But down to its runtime as well, 70 minutes, it does feel very, well, it is an amateur film for what it is, although it's a good film and I enjoyed it. I had to rank it low compared to everything else. So that's the only reason, but Following is at my number 10 pick.
I'm the exact same with you. Following's 10 on mine. I enjoyed it. I had never experienced it. I was worried. I thought this is the one that no one has ever spoken about. And it's the first one. It's the kind of polite free pass because it's the first one. And I did enjoy it. It was very short. It was very quick. And there was certainly, you can see what films came later. You can see, as you mentioned, the seeds had been planted for what was going to follow. And that's why it's slightly above Insomnia in mine, because I think Insomnia is a well-made film. But I think Following just has that very slight, that's the only time we're going to talk about originality, I guess. but following feels like, okay, this is the very beginning of his journey, and we can see this turning into Inception, this idea being applied elsewhere. And that's why it's there. I enjoyed it, and like I said, the performances aren't the best as well. I do want to say it, but as you said, it's a kind of amateur film. They're not trained actors that are in this. They're his friends. It was self-funded, and I've got a lot to respect. So it's nabbed number 10. 10 and 11's kind of on like a similar level. It's the kind of two people don't talk about, but following is 10th on mine as well.
Now, my number 9 pick might be quite controversial, 9 into 8, but here we go. This is as my list. I'm not going to change it now. Number 9 is Interstellar. Now, Interstellar is a film that I do enjoy. I do want to stress that. All the rest of these films onwards, I love, I enjoy, and I love different elements about them. I do, not that I always go by Rotten Tomatoes scores, but I do think for me personally, Interstellar is very deserving of that kind of low end 70%, mid 70%. There are things that it does astoundingly well. From a spectacle perspective, seeing space on that scale and going into that level of science is fantastic. And, you know, it's always Nolan, apart from the end of the film, chasing after that realism. But there were some drawbacks that did become apparent to me, and I was sort of weighing up whether this should overtake my next pick, or I was flip-flopping between them constantly. And I just think that from a film perspective, this one has more faults to me personally, mostly from the supporting cast. Other than Murph and Cooper, the supporting cast are just kind of there. There really isn't much to the characters. And whilst that can work for some other Nolan films, which will feature later in my list, based on the kind of film it is, I felt like this is the one that you really needed those characters so that when they are dying, you feel something, you know, you can connect with those characters. And I didn't really feel like it achieved that. And also, chief among them, probably the biggest thing for me is the plot of the film. They are having to try and stop the end of the world. And they keep saying that we need to, you know, time is ticking. We need to get back to save the world. And we see decades go past, and I don't really get those stakes. I don't really feel like the world is ending, because it doesn't look any different. And we sort of focus on this small farm, this small town. We don't really get the sense of these world-ending things that happen. So I don't really feel the tension. I don't really feel the peril. And I feel like that's a shortcoming of the film. Positives, it's definitely one of Nolan's most emotional films. Definitely are moments that do get you almost towards tears, or do get you towards tears. But just from a film perspective, those great things aside, there are a few little niggling areas for me, so that's why I rank Interstellar at number 9 for me.
So I've gone for Dark Knight Rises as number 9 for me. It was quite obvious. I still enjoy this film, but there are a lot of issues. I think when you look at the trilogy as a whole, this is the weakest of the three. There's more, not nuances, but there's more of that. If you wanted to pick something apart, you can more so for this one than arguably any of his films at all that's been made. And as you mentioned earlier, the whole heart not in it. I've always had that perspective that I still think he kind of said, you know, if you let me do Inception, I'll definitely come back and do the third Batman film. But it will be a third Batman film, and then I'm out. And that's exactly what happened. And I enjoy the scale of it. I enjoy Tom Hardy's Bane, which is a very controversial opinion. I don't mind it. But in terms of the reason it's higher than following Insomnia is, I think the sense of scale, it's seeing this is him doing these big scenes. And sometimes, you know, I do lean towards, you know, someone that doesn't mind some of the Transformers films. I can appreciate sort of scale over story at times. And I think for seeing some of the stunts, some of the set pieces and the sets they built, there's some great moments, the Zimmer score and everything like that. I do think it's okay, but it's certainly the weakest, certainly of his blockbusters, I guess we can also add in. So that's why that sits very solidly at 9th.
My number 8 pick is Insomnia. So it was Interstellar or Insomnia for me. And the reason that I ranked Insomnia just edging out Interstellar for me is that I think for the story it's telling, it does it exceptionally well. It is a very standard film, I will say that. And as you mentioned, it is a remake. Maybe if I'd have seen the original before seeing the remake, I still haven't actually seen that original. I think it's a Norwegian film, isn't it? Maybe that would have influenced my pick, ranking it this higher up the list as it is. But I do think this is one of Nolan's best written films, and I don't want to, you know, slate the guy or anything, but I do think that's down to the fact that he didn't write it. I think that people have acknowledged that he's not great with writing deep, complex characters. They are very surface level, or the plot and the complexity of the narrative do kind of overshadow some of the characters. The characters are kind of vessels for the plot to get the plot moving, rather than having those emotional characters. Obviously, some exceptions along the way, but honestly, Al Pacino and Robin Williams in this are definitely two of the most intriguing and complex characters in any Nolan film. I love the constant cat and mouse chase between the two, the similarities that they have both killed someone. And also, I think just Robin Williams' performance is a performance we haven't seen alike in any other Nolan film. It's really chilling, not even just taking Nolan out of the equation, any kind of police procedural film or sort of like serial killer film or anything like that. I definitely think that Robin Williams' performance is definitely way up there, and I think it's a very underrated performance from both the leads, but certainly Robin Williams. There's some beautiful cinematography in there as well, that sense of isolation when they go to Alaska, and it is a very standard film, but I think for what it's doing, for the story it's telling, it does it very well. There's multiple layers to the characters. They're very interesting characters that I like to see locked in this battle of wits. And I just find that more interesting and more to sort of pick into and pick apart and everything like that. So that's why Insomnia just edged out very slightly Interstellar for me. So Insomnia is at number 8.
My number 8 is something that surprised me. So I did this list a couple of weeks ago, and I was certain on everything but a 1 and 2. This is pre-Tenet as well. And obviously, we've done all these videos of each other. We've reviewed them. We've had new takes on each of the films. And when I was doing this again last night, I kind of hit this film at this point. I was like, wow. My number 8 pick is Batman Begins.
Oh, okay.
Which
that's
was it was a shock to the system as well for me, which I'm very surprised it was 8th or 7th. When you get to the next one, it begins to explain itself. But I don't know what it is. This, but maybe because I saw The Dark Knight first, and I've said that quite a lot this month. Because all my initial connections to Nolan's Batman was seeing The Dark Knight first, which should never have happened. Ultimately, should have seen this film first. But I love this story. I love the characters. I love the introduction to the world, the ensemble, and how this was a game changer. But me personally, I've not had the connection to this film that others have had, because it is the best Batman film of the trilogy. But for me, there's something not quite there, and it's his first blockbuster as well, and it's done phenomenally. It's still better than 90% of, well, it's been the top 3 comic films of all time for me. But when I was ranking all these films, there was just something was like, I can't put this above what's above it. I know that sounds silly because it's a ranking video, and I guess like when parents say like rank your kids. Batman Begins, because I don't have criticisms of this film. Maybe my criticism is that I didn't see it first, which is on me, but I can't put this, and I think this is down to the personal connection. The fact that I didn't get to experience this as a kid at the cinema, as an adult at the cinema, having hyped it, it was always there and it was always available, and I just ended up seeing it at a different point in time. And I think ultimately that's what separated me from some of the others that were above this. Obviously, I didn't see every one of his films. There's a couple of ones on here that were above it, which I definitely didn't see at cinema. But I think it's the experience of seeing that, and it somehow ended up 8th. I don't fully know how. I can't fault the list. I can't fault the film. It's just ended up there, which completely blew me away. It was a lot higher up 3 weeks ago. I've got a new look on some of these films. I think it's probably a more important thing I should have said.
My number 7 pick is Tenet. Now, I actually think that's relatively high up the list. It's sort of, like more or less middle of the range, maybe just under a little bit. Number one reason for that is it's been out a matter of weeks. Hasn't had that staying power that a lot of the other ones have. I do know that I do prefer Tenet to obviously the previous films that I've mentioned. But it's one that I kind of need to have more time with. I love the complexity of the ideas. Again, I'm not going into spoilers with this. I'm not going into specifics, but this is Nolan, to me, is his most complex film. It's a film that took me 2 to 3 viewings to pretty much completely understand. And there are still probably some little elements that even multiple viewings, I'm still going to be trying to work out where certain things happen. I realize that this film does have a lot of shortcomings as well, mostly in the audio mixing. I know that has been a problem for a lot of other Nolan films, but it became more apparent in this one to me. And there are, again, those recurring elements of the characters are very surface level, and there's not really that much depth to them, or not really much to sort of get to grips with. They're very serviceable characters, essentially. So that's probably why it's sort of at the bottom of this midway point. But I do think that in terms of action directing, it's Nolan's best. I've seen things in this film that I've never seen before. The inversion sequences are phenomenal. and it's just like the world that it shows you, this sci-fi world where all these capabilities are. It does make you just sort of sit back and think, I don't know how one man directed this, filmed this, choreographed it, let alone came up with the idea as original concept. So the reason it's lower is because of those shortcomings that I know a lot of other people are talking about and drawing reference to. But I still had a blast with it. I still love Tenet. So Tenet is my number 7 pick.
So my number 7 is Interstellar. A little behind this than I thought it would be. I love this film. I've enjoyed it. I had great experiences. I'm not going to give you the story you've heard far too many times this month about Interstellar Live, but from a personal standpoint, my connection to this obviously boosted recently. Even seeing it at the cinema the last month took me on this emotional roller coaster, which I hadn't had. Obviously, you get these moments in the first few years back, but this sort of 5-year gap now without watching this film. This film changed a lot to me on the rewatch. Maybe I'm more emotionally unstable, who knows? But I was personally connected to this film more so than maybe any of his others in terms of character arcs, in terms of structure, in terms of being sort of blown away at the science of it all. We don't get science fiction films like this anymore. And that's where it kind of stands on my list is maybe it's higher up than Batman Begins. I think the Hans Zimmer score is a really big thing for me on this one. Being able to listen to that across many years, seeing the spectacle, how some of it was configured, the science of it as well, how much detail went into that, again, bar the final scene, which they both knew as well. They knew the final scene is going to be completely unscientifically accurate, but the rest of it I want to make as scientifically possible as I can. And it's more the concept that goes into it. But a really big thing for me, this one, is that if you look at how much was changed from the first draft that his brother wrote for Spielberg and how that was rewritten into a Nolan film, that's this humongous draw where he's took the idea of someone else and he's put his own spin on it. And it just sits above Batman Begins ever so slightly. And I think I have to give it to, I think in terms of maturity of the filmmaking, I think it's there on this one. So that sneaks in at 7th.
Well, that's already surprised me that Tenet is higher up on your list. I'm looking forward to seeing where that is in a minute. But my number 6 is Dunkirk. We talked about this. We've talked about all of these for a very long time. That seems stupid to say. But in terms of the directing, I think this is one of Nolan's best. Practical effects, more or less everything in camera. Taking decommissioned artillery and planes and everything, strapping cameras to them. It seems like an absolutely manic playground, especially shooting on location as well, amidst everything. It's really just a tremendous feat of filmmaking when you do watch it. The use of sound as well. We talked about the soundtrack as well, but that use of time, that ticking really does add to that sense of urgency. Few drawbacks maybe, but I think it works more in this one is the whole character thing. But I think if you have any ounce of empathy or sympathy in your spirit, then you just basically connect to their need to get home, which is a very human emotion. And obviously the struggles that all these soldiers went through, you do connect with that as a viewer, and you do want to see them get back. There's a moment in this which I think is definitely one of the most emotional Christopher Nolan moments. It is the moment where you have all the civilian boats coming in. I just goosebumps every single time I watch that. I really don't have many negatives about this. It seems very difficult when you're ranking a film 6th and you're still more or less giving it an almost perfect, flawless review. I do think that maybe, not that I'm like a bloodthirsty like weirdo or anything, but I do think maybe if they'd have pushed it to a 15, perhaps showed more of that, a little bit of more of that violence, cranked it up a little bit, because I do think that adds a lot of weight to a war film. That being said, I think it being a 12A, I think what they were able to get away with, burning people in oil, people drowning, just the sense of panic and urgency all the way through the film, that high tension, I think they still managed to evoke that and get that across. Maybe I just wanted to get to know some of the characters a little bit more, but I understand why he didn't want to do that with this film, because it adds to that sense of anonymity that this film could be about any one of these soldiers on that beach. So Dunkirk's at number 6.
So my number 6 is one that's a lot higher than it was 2 weeks ago. Mine's Memento, which I know is going to be a lot higher for you than me. So yep. I've had a very different experience of this, where I've seen it twice. Obviously, the second time was the beginning of Nolan Month, and not that I was never fully connected to it, but it always had the reputation of this was the breakthrough film. This is the one that essentially not put him on the journey, but I guess put him on the map for everyone else to see, to mature into what we know now. And it's really only until Tenet came out last week where not my respect for this has gone up, because I still enjoyed this film. I've never had that personal attachment to it, as I've mentioned before, the same with Batman Begins, but as I've delved more into Tenet, as I've been doing these notes and losing my head and everything, the film I've been gravitating more and more towards is Memento, because I spoke about this to you and Tate on the spoiler video that I mentioned that, I thought this is going to be the Inception comparisons, in Tenet being the Inception film, when actually to me it felt more like Memento on steroids. And I keep coming back to Memento now every couple of days. I want to see it a couple more times because I've now started to develop this connection to it, albeit not through Memento, through something else, but I'm starting to see how important this film was for his career. Obviously, I knew it was important anyway because it sounds silly, but I'm now getting drawn to Memento, which I haven't done in the past, which is really cool because I always felt very distant from everyone else when that was brought up in conversation, and I did understand it, and it just wasn't one that I'd particularly jump back to, maybe because I've always mentioned I do like the spectacle side of things. But Memento's climbs right up the list, which is ironic because for a lot of people it's going to be way higher than it is for me. So that's got number 6, which even kind of fooled me.
That's the biggest surprise for me so far from hearing your list, is hearing that Memento's that high. But my number 5 is Memento. So we're almost close. We're almost around, the same ballpark with it, for exactly the same reasons you said. I mean, I had seen it, a longer time than you. I did. I don't want to say I have a personal connection to the film or anything like that, but it was one of those first few Nolan films after Prestige, after Batman Begins, after Dark Knight that I did sort of go back to and get the DVD for. And it is one that does get better with multiple viewings. For his second feature, I guess you can call it his first sort of like major official one that didn't have that sort of amateurish quality to it that maybe Following did. Bringing in the talent of Guy Pearce and everyone along with it and the supporting cast. I think that the main character in the film is one of the most complex written by Nolan. I think he's a very interesting, morally grey character that you both sympathize with. And I don't say you kind of fear him, but he's not a good guy inherently what he's doing. Neither is the guy who's putting him up to do the things. You can understand the reasons why. There's multiple layers to the character, essentially. I think that the structure, I know there is a bonus feature on, I think it's on the 2-disc collector's edition or whatever it is, where it plays the film in linear order. I still haven't seen that, but to me, the entire crux of the film is that it's played in reverse, and I'm guessing that's where the Tenet comparison comes into you. It's this displacement of time, telling a narrative in reverse or whatever it happens to be. Great twists and turns all the way through the movie, just creates a really sympathetic character, and it is a very somber film. The mood is sort of, I can understand if someone found it dull or anything like that, but this is more my pick where I looked at it as a film. And I think as a film, it's definitely one of Nolan's best. It didn't quite make the top 4, but it came damn close. I think that maybe some of the spectacle and enhanced some of the higher picks maybe. But in terms of one of his earlier films, it's definitely one of my favorites of his. And it's one that I do find myself going back to every so often just to revisit it. Maybe I notice something more. Maybe I get a new appreciation for something in there. But I think there's definitely a lot to love with Memento. And I think it's an underrated film. I think more people need to see it. But I think it is building up that bit of a following now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I was shocked at how high I put it. The next one even shocks me. 5th place, I put Prestige. Which I did think would be higher up. I adore this film. A lot of people, this is their favorite Nolan film, and I absolutely follow them in that. It is phenomenal. It is not what I expected from this film. It's not big blaring set pieces. It's not IMAX. It's not that bombastic Zimmer that we're used to. But this is just a very simple tale of just two people trying to outdo one another. And, we'll get to Dark Knight later on. But when we sort of discussed it in the past, it's kind of, this is the seeds of everything that came in that later film, ironically his next film. But Prestige is just there because I love it, and that's as much as I can love it. My connection to the 4 above it, they're in their own category now. I know we're ranking it 1 through to 11, but to me there's now a big gap between 5 and 4 with the heavy hitters. So that's why Prestige is high. I don't have any complaints on this film. I've never had issues with this. I love the cast. I love the fact that he had to get Bowie in it. I love the fact that Andy Serkis has a very small role in it. I love everything. The fact you get Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, who at the time were Batman and Wolverine, to do this smaller film that came out between the big blockbusters. And ultimately the story it tells, the rivalry at hand, is something that's just above many other rivalries in films. I think it was in our Battle of the Brackets when we did it and it won. it's just outstanding, and I can't complain it even more. It's just, to me, it's just out of that top 4 reach. They're in their own path now.
Okay, my number 4 pick is The Dark Knight. I consider 1 to 4 to be the big hitters, but I rank Dark Knight at the bottom, not because I dislike the film. I just think that there is a Batman film that I do prefer, which obviously will be coming up later on. But just what this did for comic book films, the tone of it, the fact that it's more, and maybe this is why it came at number 4 for me, because I review the Batman films that Nolan did as both Nolan films and Batman films as a Batman fan. And, you know, it's fair enough that he took it in that direction of it being more a crime thriller with Batman characters in it rather than inherently being a Batman film, which is what I think that Batman Begins probably is. I definitely think this is sort of the more filmic of the 3. I think this is a better directed one of the 3, although it's not my favorite of the trilogy. But just, I mean, Heath Ledger, I don't want to sort of like harp on the guy because everyone else has, and for good reason. Tremendous Joker, a Joker that we've never seen before. And just sort of taking it into this grounded world and make it realized. And then you have like all your copycat films that are trying to do that sort of like dark, gritty tone to it. Works for The Dark Knight, and I just think it was a tremendous film. More so in the characterizations. We talked about this in the review, but sort of the triangle that you get of Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and Harvey Dent. I thought that was an absolutely tremendously well-written piece. The way that they all play off each other. They ultimately all want the same thing. Some get damaged along the way. Some have different ideas for it. I just thought it was a beautiful concept. And then you have the Joker in the middle that's sort of playing them all off one another. There's not really much to say that we haven't already said in our Dark Knight review. And indeed, pretty much the entire internet's already talked about The Dark Knight. But it's not my favorite Batman film out of the 3. But just for what it did for film in general, and the superhero genre, comic book genre, it deserves its place on there. So number 4 for The Dark Knight for me.
My number 4 is Tenet. It just can't be higher. To me, that top 3 special. I don't know if that makes
still high. That's still high.
It's almighty high. And if you'd have asked me 10 days ago, where would you rank Tenet? I'd have said, I don't know if I like this film for a start. That's how much it's changed in over a week. And is it the fact I wrote 13 pages of notes? Is it the fact that I've delved into this like I've never been into a film before? I mentioned in our spoiler-free review how innovative it is, that this is his most I always get the words, innovative film. And I still sit here, you know, I should have seen it again today and I didn't. We'll talk about New Mutants another day. But I'm just blown away by the scale, by the action. And you mentioned earlier on, you see some of his maturity in this film, and there are issues. We've spoken hand about those. It's never affected me as much, but I'm very, very fully aware of that major criticism of the sound, which has been an issue, certainly in one big scene for me. But I think this is something that could be even higher in a couple of years when things click, because in 2010, obviously there weren't 11 films out. I wouldn't have put Inception above some other films because, to me, Inception, the idea, the film, the emotion, everything about this film has developed over the last probably 7 years, I'd say. It wasn't one of my favorite ever films to a certain point. It was never like that from day one. And even Tenet's one where I'm kind of quite cautious to put it this high still, because I think this could grow and grow. Obviously, it might not. It could even deteriorate. But to me, being able to witness that, not even the fact there was a gap from cinemas, but as you mentioned, how does one man come up with this? Seeing the direction in this film, seeing some of the set pieces, the point he's gotten to in his career where he can go to Warner Brothers and say, listen, I need $200 million for a new film. It's original and you're not allowed to read it, but you're going to give me the money. Not to me, not any other director can do that in this day and age. He is the only one. And wow, Tenet is just blowing me apart. It's really hard. I've spoken about so much over the last 10 days, and obviously I can't say anything right now. But it is up there for, I think, a combination of the innovation, the technicalities of it, and one or two of the characters. It's not the strongest, but I wouldn't say it's got his best villain either. It's easily got the second best villain of a Nolan filmography after Heath Ledger's Joker, of course. But Tenet, to me, sits at fourth. But in a couple of years' time, who knows? When there's another Nolan film out and our heads are getting blown all over the place by what's happening, Tenet could be higher up. It's it's had this effect on me that no other film, even his other films, haven't had that input of I need to know every single thing possibly known to mankind right now. And I'm still on that journey. So right now, Tenet sits at fourth, which may be the most controversial pick on my list, actually.
That's what I was saying. For me, it'll be interesting even on my list. I know I've ranked it lower than you, but over the years, mine can change. Mine could go up, mine could go down. No idea. Only time will tell. My number 3 pick. Okay, we're into the top 3 now. It's Batman Begins. I did say there was one better Batman movie. Of course, gone through the other 2. Batman Begins, because as good as Dark Knight is, you can't have Dark Knight without Batman Begins. And from the state that Batman was in, I still love it for completely different reasons. But Batman and Robin, for Batman Begins to come along from one director who hadn't had many movies under his belt before, he had some intriguing sort of thriller, kind of cerebral kind of ones, to come along and say, I've got a vision for Batman, and to then spawn a trilogy of it, one of the most famous, most successful trilogies of all time in cinema, and it all started with this one. Batman Begins whilst it's not my favorite Batman film out of all of the Batman films that have been released, for probably nostalgic reasons, it is the best Batman film about the character of Batman. The fact that we get a full origin of him, villains that we'd never seen before in live action, very lesser known ones as well, like Scarecrow, I know had its fans, but Ra's al Ghul, Carmine Falcone, all of these key players in the Batman mythology, Joe Chill, things like that, even going back to the comic books with the origins. It's just a fantastic origin story for Batman. The fact that Batman doesn't even get into the costume till about 45 minutes to an hour into the film, and you're still invested in this beginning of the character. The action in it's perfectly serviceable, it's perfectly fine, but to me, it's all of the other key players. It's seeing Michael Caine as Alfred, it's seeing Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, and all of these key players. And even at the time, like the realism that it was based on in, let's take the character of Batman and let's put him into a real world setting that's believable, that's grounded, that's dark, that's all those key buzzwords that you see in every kind of video analysis. But it worked for the character, the look of Gotham, everything involved in it. It really was a complete new, refreshing vision for the character. And it's the way that the character needed to go. Even now we're seeing, we've had Ben Affleck Batman that's still chasing after those kind of Nolan darker tones. Even the new trailer that we've had with Robert Pattinson feels very much sort of dipping its toe into that Nolan world that, Nolan created. I love Batman Begins. It's always one of my favorite. I think maybe it's that studio involvement perhaps was more so in this one. I'm not sure. I'd have to research more into that. But I think that perfect blend of the studio with its sort of saying what it wants to do with the character with Nolan's vision came completely together and made the perfect Batman movie with this. So Batman Begins is at my number 3.
My number 3 is Dunkirk. It almost broke the top 2 when I did the list last night. To me, as we said in the review, this film is his best crafted film in terms of filmmaking. I think this is easily his best film. It's something that obviously, to a point, you can say you enjoy war films. To me, it's more the how are these constructed? How can people make such obviously horrible, awful things into not just entertainment in the saddest form, but how can you reenact that thing that none of us directly witnessed and saw? And he did something to Dunkirk that hasn't been done. This is very much a British film. British castles are rule. Obviously, he's a British filmmaker. These were real boats, real warships, real planes. Everything about this was as authentic as he could possibly make it in 2017. In fact, he went to the Queen to get permission to some of the warships as well. There was so much going on in this. And of course, it's a Christopher Nolan film. What does he do? He puts his own spin on it. It's not 2.5 hours. It's not 3 hours. 1 minute 40. Oh, sorry, not 1 minute. 1 hour 40. And how am I going to tell the story of the beach, of the plains, of the sea? The 3 important things with the real life Dunkirk evacuation. Because if you chose to focus on one, you have to sacrifice the other 2. If you chose to do it in a narrative order, which you've mentioned to me as well, then it doesn't work, because you get like 5 minutes of the plane, 10 minutes of the boat, and an hour plus on the beach, and you lose so much doing that. So by making time the most important character in this film, the precision, the ticking, along with the Hans Zimmer soundtrack, this did something to me which sort of no other war film has done, where I was invested in this for completely new reasons, other than the sort of the real life side of things, other than the history angle. There was more to be seen, and as passing views went by, you'd pick up on a couple more things, certainly with the time element that, oh, look, that's the ship that actually appears then and then. And I've not had that in war films before. And it was lovely because you had this, I'm going to make a war film, but I'm putting my own stamp on it, and that's how it's going to be.
Oh, have we lost George? We were doing so well. We almost got to the top 2. It usually comes back. So,
yeah,
there we
sorry.
go.
That's my internet. I was saying he should have won Best Director Oscars that year, but he didn't. And that's the most I can say for this one from a filmmaking perspective. This is everything I thought it would be from a World War II film being directed by Christopher Nolan. That's why it sits at 3. It could have been 1 and 2. It was almost in that the top 3's interchange. I mean, most of these films on this 11 are interchangeable with another, but to me, the 1, 2, 3 are well and truly above the rest now. They're in their own. Any given day could be any given description. I'm going to keep doing them for each film because there's a reason why each of them are the way they are, and Dunkirk is that. Sorry.
Well, if you've been keeping track at home, I know what your top 2 are, but I'm very interested to see which one's going to take it. We'll have to wait and see. But my number 2, and I'm surprised that it's this high up, but when I was considering my picks, I was like, yeah, I think it's deserving of it. The Prestige is my number 2. It's, especially in terms of the casting, I'm glad you brought the casting up when you mentioned it as well. A very unconventional cast, even for a Nolan film. Yes, you do have the the returning veterans of Michael Caine and Christian Bale, fresh off Batman Begins, but you have David Bowie, Scarlett Johansson, you have Hugh Jackman, Andy Serkis. You have all of these people that haven't featured since in a Christopher Nolan film, but it just makes it way more unique with this. And the crux of this film is this rivalry, this increasingly more violent and disturbing rivalry between the 2 leads, Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. And it might not be the flashiest Christopher Nolan film or anything like that. There's no like high-speed horse and cart chases through the streets of London or anything like that. But you hang on every word. And as a magic film, there's not that many. They only crop up every now and then. Ironically, 2 came out around about the same time when this film came out. But it's just so intriguing, and it's a film that you might think once you know the ending, maybe after a couple of viewings, which is kind of standard for a Christopher Nolan film, you've got it. You know the mystery. You know where it all leads to. There's no point in going back to it. But honestly, I still find the same amount of enjoyment going back to this film every single time because it is this sort of friendship turned rivalry that is the most intriguing thing and interesting thing in the film. And even now, when you're even conscious of the ending and you know what happens, you are still looking out for those little ticks and those little cues all the way through the film, which keeps you guessing. The fact that it's a period piece as well. It's one of Nolan's very few period pieces. Obviously, you've got Dunkirk, but this one, the very grimy, sort of dingy, sort of London kind of feel to it. I just love it. Maybe it's that sort of personal connection to me as well, in that it was one of the first Nolan films when I was really getting into the director's work. I think I saw Batman Begins, and then I think Prestige was pretty much the other DVD of Nolan's work that I had, I think, because it obviously came out around about the same time, didn't it? I just love it, the interplay. I'd love to see some of those actors return to a Christopher Nolan film, and it is kind of that last low-budget Christopher Nolan film that's weirdly sort of sandwiched in between the first Batman film and then arguably one of his biggest films that he's ever made. I think it is building up that that cult following a little bit. I don't know if cult following is the right word for it, but we always say that we don't know that everyone's seen it, but the people that we have spoke to all say that they love it. So I hope it is one that people go back to if they go and check out the director's previous work. I'd love to see Nolan now after Tenet go back to a film like this and have another crack at sort of like a lower budget film, because we've seen that he can do great films with a huge budget and he can do equally as fantastic films with a lower budget as well. Very surprised that it got my number 2, but Prestige is my number 2 pick.
My number 2, this was the hardest decision because
what's it going to be?
For the people at home, I've said to everyone, like, I know, wow, I've changed a couple of things, but my 1 and 2, everyone knows it's just the order of 1 and 2.
Do I need to flip a coin for this, or?
It was almost a flip of the coin, but I'll justify who came first when we get to it. But my number 2 is Inception.
Okay.
So the first time any of us have brought up, which is a spoiler, I guess, for your next one, but I'll leave you for your segment. As I kind of hinted earlier, it didn't have this gravitation with me. Obviously, I understood it. Again, it's not an arrogant thing, but me and you've kind of always said that of each other, that when we saw that, we didn't struggle, but we do know people that did. That's why Tenet had a different experience with us, because we were one of those. But Inception's one that, as time has gone by, I've gone back to it more and more and more. And the sort of the characters have developed more, mainly Leo, that the first couple times I saw it, I didn't appreciate his individual character study because I was so blown away by the concept at hand, by going into the dreams, the world, the idea. The first ever time I saw this, I remember thinking, like, oh, you die in a dream, you do wake up in real life. And there was so much things going on where it was not affecting me sleeping, but you were noticing more things about the state of you being asleep or the dream-like world. And, you know, when we talk about that, how does one man do this type thing, you know, in 2010, it was like, oh, I've been working on this for 8 years. Nowadays, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, he's always been working on films for 20 years. But Inception is the one where it's like 8 years he worked on that. Wow. This is why we know why he needed to make that film. He was desperate to make that film. He'd just been off the biggest film of his career, one of the biggest films in history, and he was able to go to them saying, no, you're not going to bring me in for that sequel straight away. I want to make this film. I need to make this film. And he's also said in interviews that he felt that he was competent enough to make it in 2010. Absolutely was he competent enough to make this. This is my top 3 films of all time, ever. And Inception just has that appeal. And, you know, all of the supporting characters I love. They've all got their own moments, but I don't have a single fault of this film. I said that about a couple of the other ones so far today, but I've always gravitated towards the ideas, and this is why it sits at number 2, because, you know, I spoke to you about the injustice that I couldn't see it at an IMAX until a couple of weeks ago. That's not why it's number 2. But because I missed out on those experiences, as time's gone by, it's been like I started off with a DVD, and then I saw it in Blu-ray, and then it got upgraded to 4K, and then I finally got to see it in IMAX. It's been done in reverse of the years have gone by. But Inception sits at number 2 for me. If you've got to think from a filmmaking perspective, a Nolan perspective, certainly, in terms of concepts and ideas, this and Tenet are his probably 2 most devout ideas in terms of how does one man do this. But Inception has been out for 10 years now. We've had time to set, we've had time to think, and it sits at that number 2, millimeters off number 1. For any other director in the world, this will be the best one they've ever done. Yet for Christopher, this is one of the best ones he's ever done, and that goes to show this power this guy has. So that's why it's number 2 for me. Again, no faults of it.
Yeah, no, and I'm exactly the same. And surprise, surprise, number 1 for me is Inception. For all of the reasons you just listed, I mean, I ranked this at number 1 on my, I guess this is a spoiler alert for my top 25 picks of the 2010s list, but Inception was my number 1, and I was thinking, is it deserving of my number 1 for this? I guess I kind of have to if I do that, but there is a lot of other Nolan films that came before it, and a lot more that have come since, but I just think it's, as a Nolan film, it's the complete package for me. Maybe it is that sense of nostalgia. Maybe it is that first film where I was like, this concept, I don't know how anyone came up with this. The topic of dreams in general is a very interesting topic, and not many films have really gone into it. And you're right, because I did have kind of the same thing as you, where you're almost, when you're listening to the sort of expositional dialogue where they're explaining this world, you are kind of extrapolating some of this stuff and turn it on sort of like your own sleeping patterns or your own dreams, where the one that got me was the kick, where that feeling of falling snaps you awake. I was like, yes, like, so there was moments like that where you could connect with it. And, you know, I mentioned this, I think I offered this comparison in the Tenet review that we did, and probably brought it up in the Inception one as well. Sort of the ensemble cast, it is a very big ensemble cast. You don't really get much meat in terms of their characters. They all kind of fulfill a role and they stick to that role. They're played very well. They have great personalities, but you don't really know much about them personally, which I initially brought up as a criticism for the film. But when you look at that genre of film as a whole, that is kind of how it goes for these heist movies. Everyone has an allocated role. And they, you know, each of the actors, especially Tom Hardy, you've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt in there. Even the guy who plays Yusuf as well. I don't know the actor, forgive me for forgetting his name, but even him, each of them get moments. So the entire cast is very, very enjoyable to watch. You've got the spectacle of it, seeing cities fold back on themselves, the train through the street and everything like that. The hallway spin, for God's sake, one of the best action scenes in cinema history. But the main character as well with Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, probably from this movie and the same year, Shutter Island, has since become my favorite actor in the business. Absolutely love Leonardo DiCaprio in all of his films. And we get enough with his character. We get that sense of emotion with the character. We understand why he's doing what he's doing, which ultimately leads to some great interplay with him and Marion Cotillard's character. I love their dynamic. I think their chemistry is fantastic in the film. It's a very believable relationship. They play the intense moments well. They play the emotional scenes well, both of them together. And of course, the ending, the very ambiguous ending. I do love an ambiguous ending, and I think that it's the perfect ending for a film like this, and does exactly what it needs to. It plants that idea in the audience's mind, which a decade later, when we were rewatching it for these reviews, we were still coming up with new things and new readings and thinking, well, how can this be like that if that 10 years on? And I guarantee probably in 10 years' time, when I watch it again, I'll have even more. So it's just the complete one for me. It's got all of the Nolanisms, the layers of the dreams and everything, the very complex idea, but there's enough character in there for me, whereas maybe some of the other ones, maybe like Tenet, maybe like Dunkirk, perhaps don't have that sort of strong central character theme. The Hans Zimmer score too, everything sort of all comes together in this one for me. And I love it. It's a great action film, and just everything, mind-bending film. Every other descriptor, Inception's my number one. And 3 guesses what your number one is.
Absolutely. Fill in the blanks, it's The Dark Knight. Now,
Yeah.
there's, as you said, there's not much more that can be said that hasn't been said. The whole world has devoured every scene, every shot, even behind the scenes stuff which has been released. Everything's been said about this one that can. But the reason it's in those discussions is because of not just the film itself, but its impact, what's come after this redefined, not even just comic book films, that people are looking at these as films. You could even look at the Oscars, that because of the criticism that it got nominated for pretty much everything but film and director, and the next year the Oscars changed how they nominate films, how many films they're going to nominate, and the repercussions this film had on the industry. You know, we look at the 2010s as the comic book movie decade, and, you know, in the noughties we had X-Men, we had Spider-Man, we had a Superman film and a couple of other things, but The Dark Knight is the film that everyone gravitates towards. This was the first film since The Empire Strikes Back to be the insert name here of its genre films, you know, and it's now, I'd say maybe Terminator 2 sits third, but in terms of sequels, it's always the Terminator 2 of this, the Dark Knight of this, or the Empire Strikes Back of that. And The Dark Knight has absolutely reached that point. And the reason why it sits one at me above all the others is because I do need to bring the personal input of this film. The fact that I saw at the age of 12, and this changed my life to a point which no other film has done. Granted, I grew up with Star Wars, and that's a tremendous impact upon a childhood. It's what came after this is where I watched The Dark Knight. I was like, okay, I want to know, how did that truck flip? How are they robbing the bank? I wanted to know how and a why. I started learning directors, because at that age, I can only name you Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, not many others. You know, didn't know Tarantino, far too many Tarantino, but it started to bring in this film analysis in me, which essentially is going to define who I am. It's terrifying to think this is 12 years ago, and I'm 24 now. This is about for half my life, which has just hit me in another level today. And again, you know, I'm sitting here talking with you, talking about films. I've been doing this for 5 years. Did a degree in it. I studied it at college. I worked in the industry for just under a year. Everything came down to seeing this at that moment in time, and that's why it's had this impact on me. That's why I'm doing this video. You might be doing this without me for all we know, but the impact this had, and that's just my personal side of things. That's not even the film itself. You know, the plot twist. I always mention the fact that it was such a simple idea for the Joker to tell them the wrong location. Why hadn't any director done it before? Why hadn't the villain ever lied to them? Because it's something a villain would do, right? But it's not something that would translate well on film, because the hero is always going to save his love interest, and not in this one. This one changed things, and this changed everything. Then you've got your soundtrack, then you've got your cinematography, even to an extra point, technicality, IMAX. You know, this is an element. This is the guy that got IMAX to what it is today. For every blockbuster to want to be on IMAX, even if it's not filmed IMAX, they just want it in the IMAX areas. But this is the first one to use footage in a feature film that wasn't a documentary. And you look at, you know, even Tenet today, or I'd say Dunkirk's probably his best IMAX film, that he doesn't just use it as a, you just see it in IMAX, because that's what a lot of them do. Just see it in IMAX, it's bigger. This is the man that builds the sets knowing I can frame this with these cameras, with that IMAX camera. Over time, he has developed the handheld IMAX camera, which no one has done. They are humongous machines. And it's had this whole new angle on the film industry. And so much of it is responsible to this. And even for Nolan himself, we don't get Inception without Dark Knight. We don't know what comes after. In a parallel world, maybe he did 4 or 5 Batman films, which would be painful, because this showed that he was capable of so much more. Now, whether the next line is a criticism or not, is that this is more than a Batman film. As you mentioned, this is like a crime thriller. This is putting Batman in a different scenario. But I don't think he gets a $200 million budget to do this without the Batman name in here, because at that point in time, he hadn't done that big concept. Mm-hmm. We sit here 12 years later, knowing hindsight's a beautiful thing, knowing he did Inception, he did Interstellar, he's done Tenet, he's done Dunkirk, he's done all these original films. But in 2008, of course, there was some original films, absolutely. Following was original to a point. Memento, completely original. Prestige, an adaptation of a book. Insomnia, a remake. Batman Begins, an adaptation. And we sit here knowing that this was able to put him onto that next level of the journey. We talk about the streak. I know that I like Rise of Newtown, but that streak really, when people think of Nolan, it's the Dark Knight onwards. People do forget what came before. As ironically, as we've both discussed over the last month, even tonight, there are some truly tremendous great films from pre-2008. But there is a reason why 2008 is the benchmark point for his career taking off to what it is today. And I owe not just this film, but this man a lot of how I've ended up being. So that's my emotional plea done and out of the way. But that's why it has to sit at number 1 for me. I can't put Inception above it based on the impact this one has had after, which is crazy because, as I said, Inception is 99% of filmmakers' best films.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I was right there with you as well. Like that's when you start doing your film analysis and your essays, and you might do it on the Dark Knight and deconstructing it. So yeah, I was there with you as well. But we come at from different angles, don't we? I'm sort of from the Batman thing, you're from the personal connection to it. But I think as number 1 picks go, I think Inception and Dark Knight, I mean, it was interchangeable for you, are very worthy winners of the number 1 spot. And I really don't know how to end this video now, because we've done them all. We've gone through the 11. If you're going to chuck Doodlebug in there, 11.5, I guess, if you're going to, for the sake of argument, for completion's sake, because we did review that too. So, yeah, with a very heavy heart, this draws a conclusion to our Christopher Nolan month. I don't want it to end. Hopefully in a few years' time, he brings out another great film, and we get to review that, and we can kind of tack that onto this playlist maybe. But handing it over to you guys now. Let us know your favorite Christopher Nolan films, whether you just want to tell us your top 1, top 3, or if you want to list all your 11 as well, please do so in the comments below, or obviously do it on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. We have all those socials there. They're coming up along the bottom of the screen right now. So I guess it's going to be back to sort of usual order of business now. It's going to be your New Mutants. It's going to be your Mulan. It's going to be your Bill and Ted's, all these films that have been delayed, and onwards, obviously, with Wonder Woman and everything that we've got coming out this year. We'll have reviews on all of them. But I guess Tenet, with Tenet being in cinemas, I know it's not out there for everyone just yet. Keep holding on. It will be out soon. Don't worry. You'll get to see it at some point. It is sort of, I feel like Tenet's, if they do leave it in cinemas for a long time, it is going to be that film that I constantly go back to just to sort of cleanse the palate if we do have a very bad New Mutants film, for example. But we will be back tomorrow with a New Mutants review, so you can find out our thoughts on that, I guess. I'm going to pass over to you, George, because this has been sort of a labor of love for both of us over the last month, and it's kind of coming to an unofficial end. Maybe there might be some more Nolan videos that you see cropping up over the next couple of weeks, who knows, but last official one today.
Yeah, it's weird because we've done this for over a month now, and it feels a lot quicker than a month of content. And when we look at the state of the world was in that we sat down in March and April like, Tenet is going to come out on July the 17th. Obviously, we were both naive. But the fact that there was always the lifeline of it's July 31st, okay, it's August 12th. And then we knew at that point that it's going to be August the 26th. And it means that we can fill an entire month of Christopher Nolan videos. And we've gone past that. We're in September now. So even as, I've said this to you before, I'm going to say it to everyone on air as well. I couldn't have picked anyone else who've done these videos with that. I could have appreciated this more. Being able to watch Tenet with you at the BFI was a great experience, from the messing up of the car stuff to the drive. playlist. We obviously didn't do the vlog, but there's reasons for that, folks, which we'll maybe delve into in another video. Some sat-nav issues, but the main thing is we got to the BFI. The tent stuff was there. But it's just been absolutely phenomenal to do this, to look back at this. As again, I'm not going to harp on, I've done my emotional speech on my Dark Knight Rises #1. You know, this is the filmmaker that is my favorite filmmaker without a shadow of a doubt. I've always had that place in my heart for any of his films. You know, I think, did I rank Tenet higher than Last Jedi on that annual rankings video? They were 1 and 2, but I think I put, sorry, not Tenet, sorry, I meant Dunkirk. We're even going back to before Tenet came out. I kept saying Tenet, not the names of his films. But no, it's been an absolute honour to do this for everyone that's been commenting along with us. We've had people commenting on every video of ours. If they've been watching the streams, if they've been catching up later. Honestly, we've got back to all of your things on these. It's been great to have that experience with you. To our new subscribers that have found us across this month, obviously, I want to thank you for that. And yes, the Nolan stuff does come to an end, but you don't have to unsubscribe right now, because there may be other Nolan videos that do come up. Time is going to be a big factor in this. He'll have new films coming out that we do get to delve into, and maybe we need to re-rank 1 or 2 things. Who knows? But this is just the beginning of the journey. As Chris said, we have the beautiful New Mutants to review. I guess lockdown definitely isn't over. Do wear a mask. All that sort of stuff is important. But cinemas, looking at some box office numbers, the world's changing. We are going to get new releases, certainly us two, for a change in history, that international audience is actually going to be coming first for at least a couple more months. So, you know, if you don't want to watch Mulan and New Mutants, absolutely fine, folks. But we do know what we have coming up. We've got the big ones: Wonder Woman in October, Bond in November, Dune in December. We can't do a month of build-up to each of those because they're not Christopher Nolan films. But we will be here. We'll be carrying on. We'll be covering everything as usual, and we hope to have some form of schedule to you all soon. So, as a personal thing, again, thank you to everyone that has been along on this journey with us. We have loved this for the pair of us. I don't know if I've got any more to say. Again, I want to point the right way. It has been phenomenal doing these videos with you. To me, it's the best thing that we've done on this channel, and we've been doing this for 5 years, folks. Whether it can get better, who knows? But even maybe in the future, we'll talk about some behind-the-scenes things that almost did happen for this month too. We'll talk about that at a later date. But yeah, that's everything I've got to say. I'm going to round out. Finally, if you do want those Tenet descriptions, if you want to see the 13 pages of notes and all the madness that came with them, the spoiler review is in the link in the description below. As we've said, we've not spoiled anything from Tenet tonight. That's a big thing for us. We are very aware we're fortunate to have seen this film first, and we don't want to ruin that experience for anybody else in any other country that hasn't been able to. Even if it is out in your country and you're not comfortable going to the cinema, we don't want to sit here and force people to go. It's going to be out for a long time. It's going to be out for a very long time. This could be maybe not Avatar long time, but certainly I'm going to say Wonder Woman at the absolute earliest. It will go down from 20 screenings to probably 2 or 3 a day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, best way to find out our next sets of videos, as we said, New Mutants reviews coming tomorrow. I can guarantee it won't be an hour and 2 minutes like today is. Facebook, Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and the same on Instagram. And as we said, do comment below with your favorite Nolan films. We get back to all of our comments on our channel, obviously if they're appropriate. That's the main thing.
And if you've just walked into the Christopher Nolan month on this final video, you have an entire playlist to go back to and watch now, all very nicely stacked, all of the reviews that we've done in one very easy to find and very easily accessible playlist. So maybe go back. If you haven't gone through all the Christopher Nolan films yourself, now is your time to do it. Because we still have a lot of time on our hands and there's still a lot of movies to get watched. So this has been an absolute pleasure doing this with you, George. And I guess we're sort of rounding off now. Thank you to everyone who's watched this video and indeed follow us all throughout the month. And we'll be back with more content and more movie reviews. So we'll see you guys then.